Come here, boy. It's over now. It's over.
And the Indians still had a runner on second with 2 outs and a chance to win it. But Paul Morrison didn't care about the outcome anymore. He cared that Keanu Johnson had just scored a run while his dead father's Brotherhood cheered loud enough that Tim Johnson could probably hear it in Arlington National Cemetery, where heroes got buried under white marble that couldn't capture what they'd sacrificed or who they'd left behind. The Indians won the game 5-4 when Tommy Peterson hit a blooper single that dropped between the left fielder and shortstop, scoring Connor Davis from second base and sending the entire team streaming out of the dugout to mob Tommy at first base, while the Lakewood Eagles walked off the field with the kind of disappointed acceptance kids learn early in sports. Sometimes you lose close games. Sometimes that's just how baseball goes. Sometimes the other team wants it more or gets luckier or has. 71 Hells Angels in their bleachers, creating an intimidation factor that isn't against the rules, but definitely violates the spirit of recreational youth athletics. But what happened after the final out was what people would remember long after they'd forgotten the score, what local news would cover that evening, what would go viral on social media by Sunday morning and reach military veteran organizations nationwide by Monday. Keanu Johnson stood near home plate surrounded by teammates celebrating. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the bleachers where 71 Warriors were standing and applauding, not just polite appreciation, but genuine respect for what they'd witnessed. And Big Paul Morrison was walking down from the bleachers toward the field with something in his hands that Keanu couldn't quite see from this distance. The other parents were starting to disperse, gathering their children in coolers and folding chairs, casting uncertain glances at the bikers who dominated the afternoon with their presence and volume and refusal to be anything other than exactly what they claimed to be. Brothers honoring a fallen Marine by showing up for his son. Paul reached the chain-link fence that separated spectators from players, and Keanu walked over slowly, his legs exhausted from running bases, his chest tight from exertion, his face still wet from crying too many times to count, because 9-year-olds with transplanted hearts who've spent 3 years being invisible don't develop emotional calluses that can withstand being seen by 71 people simultaneously. "You played a hell of a game, son," Paul said, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. 2 hits, 2 runs scored, 1 RBI. Your father would be proud. "You came," Keanu whispered, like he still couldn't quite believe it despite the evidence standing in front of him. "All of you came. We promised," Paul answered simply. "And Hell's Angels keep their promises. Always." He held up what he'd been carrying, a black leather vest, size for a child, with patches sewn onto it that made Keanu's breath catch in his throat. The main patch on the back said "Forever Protected" in gold thread, and above it was an American flag, and below were the words Tim Johnson's son, in letters that looked like they'd been embroidered by someone who understood that some names should be written carefully because they carry weight beyond their syllables. "This is for you," Paul said. "You're not a member of the Hells Angels Cleveland chapter. You're too young, and you've got to earn your way into this brotherhood when you're old enough to understand what it means. But this vest says something important. You're under our protection. Forever. Because your father was a warrior, and warriors' children are never alone as long as the brotherhood exists." Keanu took the vest with trembling hands, held it like it was made of something more precious than leather and thread, and he looked up at Paul with eyes that were too old for 9 because grief and medical trauma age you faster than time. "Why did you really come? Was it just because my dad was a Marine?" Paul knelt down, bringing himself to the kid's eye level, and he pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper that Keanu recognized immediately as the letter he'd written Tuesday night, the one he'd left at the clubhouse with the cardboard sign. "You wrote, 'My dad always said bikers are just soldiers on 2 wheels and soldiers take care of each other.' Your father was right, Keanu. We're not just a motorcycle club. We're veterans who came home and found brothers because the world didn't want us, who wear these cuts because the military gave us purpose and the brotherhood gave us family. And when a 9-year-old with a transplanted heart walks 2 miles at night to ask us to honor his fallen father by showing up to a baseball game, we say yes because that's the only answer that matters." He paused. "We came because you asked. We came because your father earned it. But mostly, we came because that's what warriors do. We protect the children of brothers who can't protect them anymore. and you're Tim Johnson's son, which makes you ours to protect until you're old enough to protect yourself. Rachel Johnson appeared then, walking across the field from where she'd been standing near the dugout, and she'd been crying for most of the game. Crying when Keanu made the catch in right field, crying when he got his first hit, crying when 71 men stood and cheered like her nephew was the most important person in Cleveland. Crying now because she'd spent 3 months trying to fill the hole Tim's death had left and failing. Watching Keanu retreat into himself, watching him get quieter and smaller and more convinced that nobody cared. And then these bikers had shown up and given him back something she couldn't name but recognized as essential. "Thank you," she said to Paul, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for keeping my brother's promise." "Ma'am," Paul answered, standing to face her, "this isn't a one-time thing. We're setting up a rotation. 2 brothers at every one of Keanu's games going forward. Different members each time, so he gets to know the whole chapter. We're also establishing a fund for medical expenses and whatever you need for his care. And I'm personally committing to weekly check-ins, taking him to get ice cream, teaching him about bikes when he's older, being the adult male presence Tim would have been." He looked down at Keanu. "If that's okay with you, son, I don't want to replace your father. Nobody could. But I can be someone who shows up, someone who keeps the promises your dad would have kept if he could." Keanu nodded so hard it looked like his head might come loose, and he hugged Paul's leg. This massive tattooed biker who society said was dangerous, but who'd just proven he was exactly what Tim Johnson had promised. A soldier on 2 wheels, a warrior who understood that brotherhood meant protecting the vulnerable. A man who kept his word, even when it was inconvenient or expensive or required 40 minutes of riding through Cleveland to watch a little league game that his own presence would make. National news. The other Hells Angels had come down from the bleachers now. 70 men forming a semicircle around Keanu and Rachel and Paul, and Ironhead stepped forward holding something else. An American flag that had been folded into the precise triangle military funeral's use, and on top of it was a Bronze Star medal in its presentation case. "This is a replica," Ironhead said, his voice gentle despite his size. "We contacted the Marine Corps Casualty Office, explained what we were doing, and they helped us get a duplicate of your father's Bronze Star. The original is yours. Your aunt has it. But this one is for carrying, for remembering, for the days when you need to touch something that reminds you your father was a hero." He knelt down, bringing the flag and medal to Keanu's level. Tim Johnson threw himself on an IED to save his squad. That's the definition of valor. That's what Marines do. And you're Marine's son, which means you've got that same courage in your blood. We saw it today when you stood in that batter's box with 2 strikes and 71 people watching, and you swung anyway. That's what warriors do. We don't quit. Keanu took the flag and medal with the kind of reverence children show when they understand something is sacred, even if they can't articulate why. And he held them against his chest like he was trying to transfer his father's courage through cotton and bronze and memory. The other parents had stopped leaving now. They were watching this scene unfold with expressions ranging from tears to smiles to confusion, because not everyone understood what they were witnessing, but everyone could feel the weight of it, could sense that something important was happening that transcended baseball and bikers and Saturday afternoons in Cleveland parks. Frank Martinez, the league commissioner, walked onto the field with his microphone and his Vietnam veteran instincts that told him when a moment needed to be marked officially rather than just experienced privately. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cracking over the PA system, "today we witnessed something rare in youth sports. We saw a community come together to honor a fallen soldier by supporting his son. The Hells Angels Cleveland chapter rode across this city to keep a promise that Marine Sergeant Tim Johnson made before he died in Afghanistan. They filled our bleachers, they cheered for every play, and they reminded us that brotherhood doesn't end with death. It transforms, it adapts, it finds new ways to keep old promises." He looked at Keanu. "Son, your father would be proud of how you played today. But more importantly, he'd be proud that you had the courage to ask for help, to believe that someone might actually show up when you needed them. That's the bravest thing any of us can do. Ask for what we need and trust that someone will answer." The crowd that remained applauded. Not just the Indians' parents, but even some of the Lakewood Eagles families who'd initially been frightened by 71 bikers showing up unannounced, but who now understood this wasn't about intimidation or spectacle, but about honor and loyalty, and proving that sometimes the people society tells you to fear are the only ones with the courage to do what's right. Local news cameras that had been recording the game for a human interest piece about Little League Baseball had captured everything. The catch in right field, the hits, the runs scored, the moment Paul gave Keanu the vest, the flag presentation. All of it documented and ready to be broadcast on Cleveland Evening News, where it would be seen by thousands who'd spend their dinner discussions debating whether this was heartwarming or inappropriate or both. By 6 p.m. that evening, the story had been picked up by regional outlets. By 8 p.m., national networks were running it during weekend news segments. By Sunday morning, military veteran organizations across America were sharing it on social media with captions like, "This is what Brotherhood looks like," and "When warriors promise to protect, they mean forever," and "Bikers honor fallen Marine by showing up for his son." And Paul Morrison, 46-year-old Hells Angels president, former Army Ranger, man who'd seen enough death and violence to make most people quit believing in anything good, felt tears burning in his eyes because a 9-year-old with a transplanted heart had just articulated something he'd been trying to understand for 15 years. That brotherhood wasn't about leather or motorcycles or looking tough. It was about connecting people who needed each other, about showing up when someone asked for help, about keeping promises even when the men who made them were buried in Arlington. "Yes, son," Paul said quietly, "I think your dad did send us. And I think we're going to honor that by making sure you never feel alone again." 3 months after 71 Hells Angels filled the bleachers at Edgewater Park, Cleveland was experiencing the kind of February cold that makes people question why anyone voluntarily lives in a city where Lake Erie wind cuts through winter coats like they're made of tissue paper and snow piles up in parking lots until April. But inside the Cleveland Indians' Little League Awards banquet at a Holiday in Conference Room on Rockside Road, it was warm and crowded with families celebrating a season that had ended in October but was being officially recognized now that winter had settled in and parents had finally organized the logistics of getting 60 kids and their families together for pizza and participation trophies. Keanu Johnson sat at a table with his Aunt Rachel and Big Paul Morrison, who'd become a permanent fixture at family events over the past 3 months, showing up for Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas morning and every baseball game, including the ones in October when the temperature dropped and rain threatened and most fair-weather fans stayed home, but Paul never did because he'd made a promise, and Hells Angels keep their promises. And Keanu was wearing his leather vest over a button-down shirt. Rachel had insisted on for the banquet the forever protected Tim Johnson's son, patches visible to everyone in the room who'd spent the past 3 months processing what had happened that Saturday in November when a motorcycle club took over their Little League field. The relationship between the Hells Angels and the Cleveland Indians' Little League community had evolved from fear to curiosity to grudging acceptance to genuine appreciation as two brothers showed up to every game. Sometimes Big Paul and Ironhead, sometimes Wrench and Kodiak, sometimes younger members like Wicks who just patched in and was eager to participate in the chapter's community work. And they were unfailingly respectful, cheering appropriately, never cursing or intimidating opposing teams, just being present in a way that made it impossible to maintain stereotypes about bikers being dangerous criminals when they were clearly devoted to supporting a 9-year-old who'd lost his father. Coach Mike Rodriguez stood at the front of the room with a microphone, working through the roster, giving out awards. Most improved player to Tyler Mitchell, who'd learned to hit a curveball. Best sportsmanship to Marcus Chun, who'd helped opponents up when they fell. Hardest worker to Jackson Williams, who'd shown up to every practice despite living 40 minutes away. Then Coach Rodriguez paused, looked at his notes, and his voice changed to something more serious. "This next award is new. We've never given it before because we've never needed it. But this year, something happened that reminded us what sports are really about. Not winning or statistics or scholarships, but courage and brotherhood and showing up when things are hard." He gestured for Keanu to come to the front, and the room went quiet because everyone knew what was coming, had known since October that this moment was inevitable, that Keanu Johnson's story had transcended Little League baseball and become something larger about family and honor and asking for help when you need it. Keanu walked to the front slowly, his legs still not quite strong enough for his ambitions, but stronger than they'd been in November thanks to physical therapy and cardiac rehabilitation, and the simple confidence that comes from knowing 71 warriors have your back. Keanu, Coach Rodriguez said, kneeling to be at the kid's height. This award is called the Tim Johnson Memorial Courage Award. It's going to be given every year going forward to the player who demonstrates the kind of bravery your father showed in Afghanistan. Not just physical courage, but the courage to ask for help, to keep going when things are hard, to believe that people will show up if you give them the chance. He held up a plaque that had Tim Johnson's name engraved on along with the words, "Courage is asking. Brotherhood is answering," and a photo of Keanu in his baseball uniform standing between Big Paul and Ironhead. You earned this, son. Not because you got 2 hits in one game or because 71 Hells Angels showed up for you. You earned this because you walked 2 miles at night to ask for help, because you had the courage to believe your father was right about brotherhood never ending, because you keep showing up to every game even when you're tired or scared or unsure whether anyone will be in the bleachers. The room erupted in applause. Genuine, sustained applause from families who 3 months ago had been nervous about bikers at their Little League field, but who now understood that the Hells Angels hadn't shown up to disrupt their comfortable suburban world. They'd shown up to honor a fallen Marine by protecting his son, and that was the kind of thing that deserved respect regardless of leather or tattoos or stereotypes. Keanu took the plaque with shaking hands, and he looked out at the room full of families and coaches and teammates, and he saw Big Paul in the back giving him a thumbs up, and he found his voice. "Thank you," Keanu said into the microphone, his voice small but steady. "I wrote a letter to the Hells Angels because my dad told me bikers are soldiers on 2 wheels and I needed soldiers. My dad can't come to my games anymore because he died saving his squad in Afghanistan, and I thought nobody would come, thought I'd spend the rest of my life being the kid with empty bleachers. But Big Paul and his brothers showed up, all 71 of them, and they've kept showing up to every game since. They taught me that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. And they taught me that my dad was right. Brotherhood doesn't end when you take off the uniform or when you die. It just transforms into something else." He looked at Paul. "Thank you for keeping my dad's promise. Thank you for showing up." Big Paul Morrison stood in the back of that Holiday Inn conference room, feeling something he hadn't felt since before Iraq, since before PTSD and medical discharge, and 15 years of trying to prove that the Hells Angels were more than society's stereotypes. He felt like the battles had been worth it, like the brotherhood he'd built had a purpose beyond riding motorcycles and looking tough. Like maybe Tim Johnson had actually sent him that letter because warriors understand that some promises need to be kept by proxy when the original promisers are buried under white marble in Arlington. After the banquet, after the families had dispersed and Rachel had taken Keanu home, because 9-year-olds with transplanted hearts need consistent sleep schedules, Paul stood in the parking lot with Ironhead and Stitch looking at Cleveland's winter sky and processing what the past 3 months had meant. "We changed that kid's life," Ironhead said quietly. "He's not the same boy who wrote that letter in November. He's confident now, happy. He has friends. We didn't change his life," Paul corrected. "We just showed up like his father asked." Keanu changed his own life by being brave enough to ask for help. "Still," Stitch added, "what we did mattered." The Tim Johnson Memorial Fund has raised $30,000 for military families with sick kids in Ohio. Other Hells Angels chapters across the country are starting similar programs, showing up for fallen soldiers' children, keeping promises that death interrupted. "We started something bigger than one kid's baseball game." Paul nodded slowly, understanding that Keanu's cardboard sign had sparked a movement within the motorcycle community, had reminded veterans wearing leather cuts that their brotherhood had a purpose beyond riding and rebellion, that protecting the next generation of warriors' children was the highest form of honor they could demonstrate. "We should make this official," Paul said. "The Tim Johnson Legacy Project. Cleveland chapter leads it, but we coordinate with chapters nationwide to identify military families who need support, not just cheering at baseball games, though we do that too. Financial assistance, home repairs, medical expense help, whatever it takes to make sure warriors' children don't suffer because their parents died serving." "I'm in," Ironhead said immediately. Same Stitch agreed. And standing in that parking lot, three veterans who'd found Brotherhood after war made a decision that would define the Hells Angels Cleveland chapter for decades. They would honor Tim Johnson's memory not by building a monument or planting a tree or any of the passive remembrances society uses to feel like they've recognized sacrifice, but by actively protecting every warrior's child who needed help, by showing up when others wouldn't, by keeping promises that death had interrupted, by proving that brotherhood was more than a word on leather cuts, but a commitment that transcended time and tragedy and loss. By March, the Tim Johnson Legacy Project was operational, a nonprofit organization run by the Hells Angels Cleveland chapter, but open to donations from civilians who wanted to support military families. By April, they'd helped 12 families across Ohio, with everything from paying for cancer treatment for a Navy SEAL's daughter, to fixing the wheelchair ramp at an Army widow's house, to sending a Marine son to baseball camp he couldn't otherwise afford. By June, when Keanu's spring season started, the bleachers at every game had at least 20 bikers. Not just Hells Angels, but members from other clubs who'd heard the story and wanted to participate in keeping promises for fallen brothers. The relationship between law enforcement and the motorcycle community in Cleveland shifted too. Police who'd spent decades viewing bikers with suspicion started recognizing that the Hells Angels were doing community work that stretched government resources couldn't handle, that they were filling gaps in the VA system and military support structures, that they were proving bikers weren't gangs, but brothers who'd found family after the military had discarded them. The mayor of Cleveland officially recognized the Hells Angels Cleveland chapter in May with a commendation for outstanding community service and support from military families. And Big Paul stood on the steps of Cleveland City Hall accepting the plaque, while news cameras rolled and Keanu Johnson, wearing his leather vest and holding his father's Bronze Star, stood beside him, proving that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships create the most powerful change. But what Paul would remember most from those 3 months wasn't the awards or media coverage or nonprofit success. It was the small moments that proved brotherhood was real. Teaching Keanu to change a motorcycle tire on a Sunday afternoon in the clubhouse, while the kid asked 1,000 questions about engines and leather and what it takes to earn your way into a club. Watching Rachel cry happy tears when she opened the envelope containing $3,000 in medical bill assistance from the Tim Johnson Memorial Fund. Sitting in Edgewater Park bleachers on a cold October evening, watching Keanu play the final game of the season and hit a double that brought in the winning run, while 20 Hells Angels cheered like he was their own son, because in every way that mattered beyond biology, he was. 1 year after Big Paul Morrison found a cardboard sign outside the Hells Angels Cleveland clubhouse, Keanu Johnson stood in the same parking lot where he'd left that sign, but he wasn't alone and scared this time. He was standing beside Paul and Ironhead and Stitch and 40 other bikers who'd become family over 12 months of showing up to baseball games and birthday parties and hospital appointments when Keanu's transplanted heart needed monitoring. It was November again, the same cold wind coming off Lake Erie, the same gray Cleveland sky that made you question whether the sun still existed or was just a memory from summer. But everything else had changed in ways that couldn't be measured by calendars or clocks or the distance between then and now. Keanu was 10 now, taller, stronger, more confident, wearing his leather vest over a winter coat and carrying a new cardboard sign he'd made last night with Rachel's help. Because today was special. Today was the 1-year anniversary of the Hells Angels showing up to his game. And today they were starting something that Paul said would honor Tim Johnson more than any monument or memorial ever could. The new sign read, "Are you a warrior's child who needs help? The Hells Angels are here for you. Tim Johnson Legacy Project." They were standing in front of the clubhouse because the local news was coming to do a story about the nonprofit that had grown from one 9-year-old's desperate letter into a statewide program that had helped 43 military families over the past 12 months. And Paul wanted Keanu front and center because this was a story. His courage had sparked this movement, and warriors' children deserve to be visible rather than hidden. Deserved to know they mattered enough that 71 bikers would drop everything to keep promises their fathers couldn't. The WKYC news van pulled up at 10 a.m., and reporter Betsy Kling stepped out. a Cleveland media fixture who'd covered everything from mayoral elections to championship parades, but who'd told Paul on the phone that this story mattered more than most because it challenged everything society believed about bikers and military families, and who shows up when tragedy strikes. Rachel will raise him right. She's strong and loyal, and will do everything in her power to give Keanu the childhood he deserves. But she can't give him what I would have given him: the presence of a father figure, the knowledge that men show up when they promise to, the understanding that asking for help isn't weakness, but the bravest thing a warrior can do. So if you're reading this, if something happened to me and this journal made it home, find my son. Tell him his father loved him. Tell him the brotherhood doesn't end. Tell him to ask for help and trust that someone will answer. Tell him warriors keep their promises, even after death, especially after death. Tim Johnson, Marine Sergeant, writing from Helmand Province, Afghanistan, 0200 hours, knowing tomorrow's mission is dangerous, but believing in brotherhood enough to think this message might matter. The clubhouse was silent, 70 men processing that Tim Johnson had literally written instructions for how to care for his son hours before dying, had trusted that somewhere in America there were bikers who would understand military honor deeply enough to keep a promise on his behalf, had believed in brotherhood so completely that he'd written those words in a journal that wouldn't be read for a year, but would eventually reach the exact people who needed to read them. "We're not stopping," Paul said, his voice steady now, harder, carrying the weight of understanding that this was bigger than one kid's baseball game, bigger than one nonprofit in Ohio, bigger than the Hells Angels Cleveland chapter. The Tim Johnson Legacy Project is going nationwide. We're going to partner with every motorcycle club that shares our values. Hells Angels, Iron Order, Mongols, Banditos, doesn't matter the patch or the colors. If you're veterans who found brotherhood after war, you're in. We're going to identify every fallen warrior's child who needs help, and we're going to show up. All of us. Because Tim Johnson trusted us to keep his promise. And we're going to prove that warriors mean what they say about brotherhood never ending. The vote was unanimous. The commitment was absolute. And by Christmas 2024, the Tim Johnson Legacy Project had expanded to 22 states with over 1,000 bikers participating, showing up to baseball games and dance recitals and school assemblies, helping with medical bills and home repairs and whatever families needed, because that's what warriors do when they promise to protect each other's children. But the moment that defined the entire year came on a Saturday in December when Keanu's team, Cleveland Indians Little League, played in a holiday tournament at an indoor facility in Parma, Ohio, and the bleachers were filled with 200 bikers from 6 different clubs who'd driven through snow to honor a fallen Marine by cheering for his son. Keanu came up to bat in the 3rd inning, and when the announcer said, "Number 7, Keanu Johnson," 200 warriors stood and cheered so loud the opposing team's parents looked around trying to understand what was happening. Why their recreational youth baseball game had been transformed into something that felt like a religious ceremony or military funeral, or the kind of moment that defines whether people are actually who they claim to be. Keanu stood in that batter's box, looked at the bleachers filled with leather and patches and American flags, and he thought about his father writing in a journal hours before dying, trusting that somewhere in America there were men who would keep his promise, believing in brotherhood enough to think that words written in Helmand Province might eventually reach Cleveland and save his son from loneliness and abandonment and the kind of isolation that kills children slower than IEDs kill Marines. But just as surely, the pitch came. Keanu swung. The ball connected and sailed into left field for a double that brought in 2 runs. And 200 bikers cheered like Keanu Johnson had just won the World Series, like this 10-year-old with a transplanted heart was the most important person in Ohio, like his father's promise had been kept after all. Not by Tim Johnson, who was buried in Arlington under white marble that couldn't capture what he'd sacrificed, but by warriors on 2 wheels who understood that some promises outlive the men who make them. That brotherhood doesn't end with death. That asking for help is the bravest thing any of us can do, and that when warriors' children need protection, you don't send one person, you send everyone. Because that's what the leather means. That's what the patches say. That's what Forever Friend promises. Always. Especially after death. Especially when a 9-year-old walks 2 miles at night, carrying a cardboard sign, and trusts that somewhere in the darkness, Warriors are waiting to keep promises his father couldn't. And they do. Every single time. Because that's what warriors do. They show up.